There's a reason our No Sleep has become the internet's most infamous campfire. It's a place where the line between fiction and reality blurs, where the stories are so vivid, so personal, that you can't help but wonder, what if it really happened? Tonight, we're diving into the creepiest our No Sleep stories that actually happened. True tales that started as anonymous posts, but were later confirmed, corroborated, or simply too real to ignore. These aren't just stories to scare you. They're warnings, confessions, and sometimes desperate attempts to make sense of the unexplainable. So turn down the lights, settle in, and remember, everything you're about to hear is true. Our first story comes from a user who called herself Midnight Typewriter. She posted about a series of strange events that began when she moved into a new apartment. At first, it was little things: keys going missing, lights flickering, the feeling of being watched. She chalked it up to stress and the unfamiliar creaks of an old building. But then, one night she woke up to the sound of footsteps in her hallway. She lived alone. Frozen in bed, she listened as the footsteps moved closer, stopping just outside her door. She could see the shadow of feet beneath the crack. The doorknob turned, slowly, but the door was locked. The footsteps retreated, and she lay awake until dawn, heart pounding. The next morning, she found muddy footprints in the hallway, prints that didn't match her shoes. She called the police, who found signs of forced entry on the back door. Someone had been inside her apartment, watching her sleep. The story went viral, and a few weeks later, local news reported the arrest of a man who had been breaking into apartments in her neighborhood. Midnight Typewriter's story was no longer just a creepy post. It was a warning that sometimes the monsters are real. The next story is from a user named Lost in the Peens. He grew up in a rural area, surrounded by dense woods. As a teenager, he and his friends would sneak out at night to explore the forest, daring each other to go deeper and deeper. One night, they found an old, abandoned cabin. The windows were boarded up, the door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, they found strange symbols carved into the walls and piles of animal bones arranged in circles. The air was thick with the smell of decay. As they explored, they heard footsteps outside. Thinking it was just another friend playing a prank, they laughed it off, until the footsteps multiplied. Soon it sounded like a dozen people were circling the cabin. The boys huddled together, terrified, as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Suddenly, the noises stopped. When they finally worked up the courage to leave, they found the ground outside covered in fresh footprints, bare feet, all different sizes, leading into the woods. They ran all the way home and never spoke of it again. Years later, Lastanthopines returned to the cabin as an adult, only to find it burned to the ground. The local sheriff told him the area was known for strange disappearances, and that he was lucky to have made it out. Not all our No Sleep stories are about strangers in the night. Some are about the people closest to us. Glasses wrote about her childhood best friend, Lily. They were inseparable, sharing secrets, sleepovers, and a love of ghost stories. But as they got older, Lily changed. She became withdrawn, obsessed with the idea that something was watching her. She would wake up screaming, convinced there was someone in her room. Her parents dismissed it as nightmares, but Glass Eyes believed her. One night during a sleepover, Glass Eyes woke to find Lily standing at the window, staring into the darkness. When she asked what was wrong, Lily whispered, "He's here." Glass Eyes looked outside but saw nothing. The next morning, Lily was gone. Her parents called the police, and a search began. Days later, Lily was found in the woods, disoriented and unable to explain what had happened. She never spoke of that night again, but Glass Eyes always wondered what she had seen, and if it was still out there watching. Some stories are so strange, so impossible that they defy explanation. Static Signal posted about a night when he was driving home from work on a deserted highway. The radio began to crackle with static, and the headlights flickered. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the road, a woman in a white dress, her face obscured by long dark hair. He slammed on the brakes, but she vanished. Shaken, he continued driving, only to see her again, standing by the side of the road, staring at his car. This happened 3 more times before he finally reached home. When he told his family, his grandmother grew pale. She told him about a local legend, a woman who had died on that stretch of road decades earlier, said to appear to travelers as a warning. A week later, Static Signal's story was picked up by a local paranormal investigator. who confirmed that multiple people had reported seeing the same apparition in the same place. The story became a local legend, and Static Signal's post was cited in several documentaries about haunted highways. Some nosleep stories are so chilling because they start with something so ordinary, so relatable, that you can't help but put yourself in the narrator's shoes. That's exactly what happened to a user named Night Shift Nina, who worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store in a small town. Her post began with the usual complaints: boredom, weird customers, the endless hum of fluorescent lights. But then she described the night everything changed. It was 2:30 a.m. when a man walked in, wearing a heavy coat despite the summer heat. He didn't speak, just wandered the aisles, picking up random items and putting them back. Nina tried to make small talk, but he ignored her. When he finally approached the counter, he placed a single can of soup on the belt and stared at her with cold, unblinking eyes. As she rang him up, he leaned in and whispered, "You shouldn't be here tonight." Then he left, leaving the soup behind. Nina tried to shake it off, but the feeling of dread lingered. An hour later, the store's phone rang. It was the police, warning her that a man matching the customer's description had just robbed a gas station down the road and was considered dangerous. They told her to lock the doors and stay inside until officers arrived. Nina spent the rest of her shift watching the parking lot, heart pounding, convinced the man would return. He never did, but she never worked the night shift again. Her story was later confirmed by local news reports, and other employees came forward with similar encounters. Sometimes, the creepiest stories are the ones that end with a narrow escape. Another story that blurred the line between fiction and reality came from old Houseco's. He and his wife had just bought their first home, a charming, if slightly run down, Victorian on the edge of town. From the moment they moved in, strange things started happening. Doors would slam on their own, cold spots would appear in the middle of the summer, and at night, they would hear footsteps in the attic. At first, they blamed the house's age, but the events grew more intense. One night, old house echoes woke to the sound of someone whispering his name. He sat up, heart racing, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure vanished when he turned on the light, but the feeling of being watched never left. His wife began having nightmares, waking up screaming about a woman in a black dress. They found old photographs in the attic, images of a family who had lived in the house a century earlier. In every photo, a woman in a black dress stood in the background, her face blurred. Desperate for answers, they invited a local historian to visit. She told them the house had a tragic past. A woman had died there under mysterious circumstances, and her spirit was said to haunt the property. The couple eventually moved out, unable to shake the feeling that they were not alone. Their story was later corroborated by neighbors and local records, turning their nosleep posts into a documented haunting. Not all stories are about ghosts or intruders. Some are about the things we can't see, the moments when reality itself seems to bend. Looped Again wrote about a night when he was walking home from a friend's house. He took a shortcut through a park, a path he'd walked 100 times before. But that night, something was different. The park seemed endless, the path looping back on itself no matter which way he turned. The trees grew denser, the air colder, and the sounds of the city faded away. After what felt like hours, Looped Again finally emerged onto a street he didn't recognize. He checked his phone, no signal. He walked for another hour, before finally finding a familiar landmark. When he got home, he realized he'd been gone for nearly 5 hours, even though the walk should have taken 20 minutes. He posted his story on our nosleep, and dozens of users replied with similar experiences. Places that seemed to trap them, time that slipped away, paths that led nowhere. Some called it a glitch in the Matrix, others a brush with another world. Whatever it was, Looped Again never took that shortcut again. Then there's the story of Watcher in Ewoods, who grew up in a house surrounded by dense forest. As a child, she would play outside until dusk, always feeling like she was being watched. One evening, she saw a figure standing among the trees. A tall, thin man with no face, just a blank expanse where his features should have been. She ran inside, but the figure appeared again and again. Always at the edge of the woods, always watching. Years later, after her family moved away, Watcher in the Woods returned to visit the old house. The new owners told her they'd seen the same figure, always at dusk, always silent. Local legends spoke of a spirit that haunted the forest, a guardian or a warning, depending on who you asked. Her story became one of the most upvoted on or not Alep, and several users shared similar encounters from around the world. Sometimes, the things that haunt us are older than we can imagine. Some of the most unsettling nosleep stories are the ones that start with a sense of safety. A family gathering, a childhood memory, a routine night at home, only to spiral into something unexplainable. That's what happened to a user named Family Flicker, who posted about a Thanksgiving dinner that still haunts her years later. She described how her extended family would gather every year at her grandparents' old farmhouse. The house was always full of laughter, the smell of roasting turkey, and the clatter of dishes. But one year, as the sun set and the family gathered around the table, the lights began to flicker. At first, everyone joked about the old wiring. But then the flickering grew more intense, almost rhythmic, as if the house itself was breathing. Suddenly, the room went dark. In the silence, Family Flicker heard a voice whisper her name, soft, urgent, and coming from the far end of the table. She called out, thinking it was her cousin playing a prank, but no one answered. When the lights finally came back on, everyone was sitting exactly where they had been, except for her uncle, who was standing in the corner, staring at the wall. He didn't respond when anyone spoke to him, and for the rest of the night, he seemed distant, almost hollow. The next morning, he had no memory of what happened. Family Flicker's story was corroborated by several family members, who all remembered the blackout and the strange change in her uncle. The farmhouse was eventually sold, but the story became a family legend, a warning that sometimes the past lingers in the walls. Another story that blurred the line between reality and nightmare came from Basement Techos. He wrote about moving into a new apartment with his girlfriend. The place was cheap, a little run down, but it had a finished basement that seemed perfect for a home office. From the first night, they heard strange noises coming from below, scraping, tapping, and what sounded like faint whispers. They tried to ignore it, blaming the old pipes or the neighbors next door. One night, Basement Techos went downstairs to investigate. As he reached the bottom step, he saw a shadow dart across the far wall. He called out, but there was no answer. He searched the basement, finding nothing but old boxes and dust. But as he turned to go back upstairs, he heard a voice whisper his name. So close it felt like someone was standing right behind him. He spun around, but the basement was empty. The next morning, Kaze's girlfriend found a message scrawled in the dust on the basement window. "Get out." They moved out a week later. When they told the landlord, he admitted that the previous tenant had left suddenly, refusing to ever set foot in the basement again. The story was later confirmed by neighbors, who said the building had a reputation for strange happenings. Sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that follow you home. Not all are nosleep. Stories are about haunted houses or ghostly apparitions. Some are about the moments when reality itself seems to fracture. Double Take posted about a night when he was walking home from a friend's party. He passed a man standing under a streetlight, wearing a red jacket and smoking a cigarette. The man nodded as Double Take walked by. A few blocks later, he saw the same man, same jacket, same cigarette, same nod, standing under another streetlight. Double Take was sure it was a coincidence, until it happened a third time, then a fourth. He started to feel like he was trapped in a loop, like the world was repeating itself. When he finally reached his apartment, he looked out the window and saw the man standing across the street, staring up at him. The next morning, the man was gone. But Double Take never forgot the feeling of being watched, of reality folding in on itself. His story sparked a wave of similar posts. People who had seen the same stranger in different places, who had experienced moments when the world seemed to glitch then. There's the story of Silent Steps, who grew up in an old house with creaky floors and drafty windows. As a child, she would hear footsteps in the hallway at night, soft, deliberate, and always stopping outside her door. Her parents told her it was just the house settling, but the footsteps continued, night after night. One evening, she decided to stay up and see what would happen. As the clock struck midnight, she heard the footsteps again, growing louder, closer. The doorknob turned, and the door creaked open just a crack. Silent steps held her breath, too scared to move. The door slowly closed, and the footsteps retreated. The next morning, she found a small, hand-carved wooden doll on her nightstand, a doll she had never seen before. She asked her parents, but they had no idea where it came from. Years later, when the family moved out, they found dozens of similar dolls hidden in the walls and under the floorboards. The new owners reported hearing footsteps, too. Sometimes, the things that haunt us leave behind more than just memories. Some nosleep stories are so disturbing because they reveal how thin the veil is between the ordinary and the terrifying. That was the case for Mailbox Watcher, who posted about a series of unsettling events that began with a simple routine: checking the mail every afternoon. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other and nothing ever seemed out of place. But one day he found a letter in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sentence, "I see you." At first, he thought it was a prank. But the letters kept coming, each one more personal, referencing things only someone watching him could know. What he wore to work, what he ate for dinner, even the song he hummed in the shower. He started to feel paranoid, checking the windows, double-locking the doors, but the letters didn't stop. One night, he heard footsteps outside his house. He called the police, but they found nothing. The next morning, there was a letter taped to his front door. "You can't hide." Mailbox Watcher posted updates as the situation escalated. Other users offered advice, some even sharing similar experiences. Eventually, he installed security cameras and caught a figure on video. Someone in a hood, moving with eerie precision, always just out of clear view. The police took the footage seriously, and after a few tense weeks, they arrested a neighbor who had become obsessed with watching him. The story was later confirmed by local news, and Mailbox Watcher's post became a cautionary tale about how quickly the familiar can turn sinister. Another story that blurred the line between reality and nightmare came from Night Train Echo. She commuted home late every night, always taking the same train, always sitting in the same car. One evening, she noticed a man sitting across from her, staring intently. He never blinked, never looked away, just watched her with a cold, unsettling gaze. She tried to ignore him, but every night he was there. Same seat, same stare. One night, as the train pulled into her stop, the man stood up and followed her off the train. She quickened her pace, but he matched her step for step. She ducked into a convenience store, heart racing, and waited until she was sure he was gone. When she finally made it home, she found a note slipped under her door. "Nice walk. See you tomorrow, Night." Trainico posted her story, and other users urged her to contact the police. She did, and with their help, the man was identified as someone with a history of stalking. Her story was later corroborated by police reports, and she credited the nosleep community with helping her stay safe. Not all our nosleep stories are about strangers. Some are about the people we trust the most. Roommate Riddle wrote about moving in with a new roommate after college. At first, everything seemed normal. They got along well, shared chores, and even became friends. But then, strange things started happening. Food would go missing, lights would be left on, and sometimes she would wake up to find her bedroom door open. Even though she always locked it at night, one evening, she came home early and found her roommate standing in her bedroom, going through her drawers. When confronted, the roommate claimed she was just looking for a charger, but roommate Triddle didn't believe her. She set up a hidden camera, and over the next week, caught her roommate entering her room every night, standing over her bed, just watching her sleep. She moved out immediately and reported the incident to the police. The footage was enough to get a restraining order, and her story became a viral warning about trusting the people you live with. Then, there's the story of Shadow on the Wall, who grew up in a house with a strange shadow that would appear on her bedroom wall every night. No matter how she arranged her furniture or where the light came from, the shadow was always there, tall, thin, and unmoving. As a child, she convinced herself it was just her imagination, but as she grew older, the shadow seemed to grow too. Sometimes she would wake up to find it closer to her bed, darker and more defined. One night, she woke to find the shadow looming over her, its edges flickering like smoke. She screamed and her parents rushed in, but the shadow vanished. They told her it was just a nightmare, but the fear never left. Years later, after moving out, she learned that the previous owner's child had died in that room under mysterious circumstances. Other tenants reported seeing the same shadow, always in the same spot, always watching. Shadow on the Wall's story became one of the most discussed on our nosleep, with dozens of users sharing similar experiences. Sometimes, things that haunt us are older than we can imagine. Some our nosleep stories are so haunting because they reveal how quickly the ordinary can become terrifying, and how the things we dismiss as imagination can sometimes be all too real. That was the case for Closet Voices, who posted about a childhood fear that turned out to be more than just a bad dream as a kid. Closet Voices was terrified of the closet in his bedroom. Every night, as he tried to fall asleep, he would hear faint whispers coming from behind the door. At first, he thought it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind outside. But the whispers grew louder, sometimes forming words he couldn't quite understand. He told his parents, but they brushed it off as nightmares. Determined to prove he wasn't imagining things, he set up a tape recorder in his room one night. The next morning, he played back the tape and heard the whispers, clear, chilling, and unmistakably real. The recording captured a voice repeating his name, followed by a low, guttural laugh. He played the tape for his parents, who were so disturbed they moved him to another room. Years later, when the family sold the house, the new owners reported hearing the same whispers. Closet Voices' story was later confirmed by his parents in the comments, and the tape became a local legend among his childhood friends. Another, a story that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural came from Mirror Watcher. She wrote about a strange experience with the bathroom mirror in her childhood home. Every night, as she brushed her teeth, she would catch glimpses of movement in the reflection, shadows darting behind her, faces that weren't her own. One night, she saw a woman standing behind her in the mirror, dressed in old-fashioned clothes and staring with hollow eyes. When she turned around, the bathroom was empty. Terrified, she told her parents, who dismissed it as an overactive imagination. But the sightings continued, growing more frequent and more vivid. One evening, her mother saw the woman too, and the family finally believed her. They learned that the house had once belonged to a woman who had died in the bathroom under mysterious circumstances. After they moved out, the new owners reported similar experiences. Mirror Watcher's story became one of the most upvoted on our nosleep, dozens of users sharing their own mirror-related encounters. Sometimes, the things we see out of the corner of our eye are more real than we want to believe. Not all our nosleep stories are about ghosts or haunted houses. Some are about the moments when reality itself seems to fracture. Lost Time posted about a night when he was driving home from work. The drive usually took 20 minutes, but that night, he arrived home to find that 3 hours had passed. He had no memory of where the time went, no explanation for the missing hours. His phone showed calls and texts he didn't remember sending, and his car's odometer showed he had driven twice as far as usual. Lost Time posted his story, and dozens of users replied with similar experiences. Lost time, missing hours, and memories that didn't match reality. Some called it a glitch in the Matrix, others suggested alien abduction or sleepwalking. Whatever the cause, Lost Time never found an explanation, but the experience left him questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. Then, there's the story of Window Watcher, who grew up in a house with a large window facing the backyard. Every night, as she lay in bed, she would see a figure standing outside, just beyond the reach of the porch light. The figure never moved, never spoke, just watched. She told her parents, but they never saw anything. One night, she worked up the courage to go outside and confront the figure, but when she stepped onto the porch, it vanished. Years later, after moving out, she learned that the previous owner's daughter had disappeared from the house. and neighbors reported seeing a strange figure in the yard around the time she vanished. Window Watcher's story became a local legend, and other users shared similar experiences. Figures at the window, always watching, always waiting. Sometimes the things that haunt us are closer than we think. These stories remind us that the world is full of mysteries, that the line between reality and nightmare is thinner than we want to believe. Whether it's a voice in the closet, a face in the mirror, or a figure at the window. Sometimes the creepiest stories are the ones that actually happened. Some no-sleep stories are so chilling because they force us to confront the unknown, to realize that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't explain. That was the case for Static Caller, who posted about a series of late-night phone calls that still haunt him to this day. It started with a wrong number. The phone would ring at exactly 3:17 a.m., and when Static Caller answered, all he heard was static. No voice, no background noise, just a low, crackling hum. At first, he thought it was a prank or a glitch, but the calls kept coming, always at the same time, always the same static. He tried blocking the number, but the calls would come from different numbers each night. He unplugged his phone, but the calls continued on his cell. Then, on his work line, one night, he let the call go to voicemail. When he played it back, he heard his own voice, distorted and echoing, repeating a phrase he didn't remember saying, "Don't answer the door." The next night, someone knocked on his door at exactly 3:17 a.m. He didn't answer, and the knocking eventually stopped. The calls ended after that, but Static Caller never found out who or what was trying to reach him. His story was later corroborated by friends who had witnessed the calls, and it became a viral thread on our nosleep, with dozens of users sharing similar experiences. Another story that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural came from Locktrum. She wrote about a night when she was home alone, reading in bed. She heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, stopping outside her door. She called out, thinking it was her roommate, but there was no answer. The footsteps continued, pacing back and forth, then stopped. Suddenly, the doorknob began to rattle as if someone was trying to get in, terrified. Locktrum called her roommate, who was still at work. She called the police, who arrived to find the apartment locked and empty. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing to explain the footsteps or the rattling doorknob. The police searched the building, but found nothing. Locktrum moved out soon after, unable to shake the feeling that something had been trying to get to her. Her story was later confirmed by her roommate and the police report, turning our nosleep post into a documented case of the unexplained. Not all our nosleep stories are about haunted houses or ghostly apparitions. Some are about the moments when reality itself seems to fracture. Echo Zinthal posted about a night when he was walking home from a friend's house. He took a shortcut through an alley, a path he'd walked 100 times before. But that night, something was different. The alley seemed longer, the shadows deeper, and the air colder. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him, perfectly matching his own. He stopped, and the footsteps stopped. He started walking again, and the footsteps resumed. He turned around, but the alley was empty. He started to run, but the footsteps kept pace, always just behind him. When he finally reached the end of the alley, he looked back one last time and saw a shadowy figure standing where he had started, watching him. Echo Zinthal never took that shortcut again, and his story sparked a wave of similar posts. People who had heard footsteps that weren't their own, who had felt the presence of something unseen, who had experienced moments when the world seemed to echo back at them. Then there's the story of the Watcher Returns, who grew up in a house with a strange tradition. Every year on the same night, someone would leave a single white rose on the front porch. No one knew who left the rose or why, but it happened like clockwork, year after year. As a child, the Watcher Returns thought it was a sweet gesture. Maybe from a secret admirer or a neighbor with a sense of humor. But as he got older, he started to notice other things, strange noises in the night. Shadows moving outside his window, the feeling of being watched. One year, he decided to stay up and catch the person leaving the rose. At midnight, he saw a figure in a dark coat approach the porch, place the rose, and disappear into the night. He tried to follow, but the figure vanished without a trace. The next morning, found a note with the rose. "I'll always be watching." The tradition continued even after his family moved away, with the new owners reporting the same mysterious rose every year. The Watcher Returns' story became a local legend, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Some are no-sleep stories or so. Unforgettable because they show how the most ordinary moments can turn into lifelong nightmares. That was the case for Backyard A's, who posted about a summer night that changed the way he looked at his own home forever. He was a teenager, home alone while his parents were out for the evening. It was a warm night, and he left the back door open to let in the breeze. As he watched TV, he kept catching glimpses of movement in the backyard. Just shadows at first, then the unmistakable shape of a person standing by the fence. He turned off the lights and peered outside, heart pounding. The figure was gone. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Later that night, as he was getting ready for bed, he heard the back door creak open. He froze, listening as footsteps moved through the kitchen, then down the hallway toward his room. He hid in the closet, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped outside his door, then retreated. When he finally worked up the courage to come out, he found muddy footprints leading from the back door to his bedroom and back out again. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, but the sense of violation was overwhelming. Backyard Eyes called the police, who found no sign of forced entry. The story was later confirmed by his parents and neighbors, who reported seeing a stranger lurking in the area that night. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that end with a narrow escape. Another story that blurred the line between reality and nightmare came from Staircase Whisper. She lived in an old apartment building with a creaky wooden staircase. Every night, as she lay in bed, she would hear someone slowly climbing the stairs, pausing outside her door, then descending again. She asked her neighbors, but no one else heard the footsteps. One night, she decided to stay up and watch through the peephole. At exactly 11:25 a.m., she saw a shadowy figure climb the stairs, stop outside her door, and stand perfectly still for several minutes before turning and walking back down. Terrified, she called the building manager, who checked the security cameras. The footage showed the staircase empty and still at the exact time she saw the figure. No one entered or left the building. The manager told her that previous tenants had reported the same thing. Always at 2:13 a.m., always the same slow, deliberate footsteps. Staircase Whisper's story became a viral thread, with dozens of users sharing similar experiences in old buildings. Sometimes, things that haunt us are woven into the very walls. Not all are no sleep. Stories are about haunted houses or ghostly apparitions. Some are about the moments when reality itself seems to fracture. Wrong Turn posted about a night when he was driving home from a friend's house. He took a wrong turn and ended up on a road he didn't recognize. The streetlights were out, the house is dark, and the air felt heavy. As he drove, he realized the road seemed to loop back on itself. No matter which way he turned, the same mailbox, the same tree, the same broken street sign appeared again and again. After what felt like hours, he finally found his way back to a main road. When he checked the time, only 20 minutes had passed, but the experience left him shaken. He posted his story and dozens of users replied with similar tales. Roads that led nowhere, neighborhoods that didn't exist on any map, places that seemed to trap them until they found the right way out. Some called it a glitch in the Matrix, others a brush with another world. Whatever it was, Wrong Turn never took that route again. Then there's the story of Under the Bed, who grew up with a fear of monsters hiding under the bed. As a child, she would check every night before going to sleep, convinced that something was waiting for her in the darkness. One night she heard scratching from beneath the mattress. She called for her parents, who found nothing. But the scratching continued, growing louder and more frantic. Years later, after moving out, she learned that the house had a history of strange occurrences. Missing pets, unexplained noises, and a previous tenant who had vanished without a trace. Under the Bed story became a local legend, and other users shared similar fears. Things that lurk just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. Sometimes the things that haunt us are the ones we can't see. If you've made it this far, you know that the creepiest or nosleep stories aren't just about ghosts, monsters, or things that go bump in the night. They're about the moments when reality itself seems to shift, and the world you thought you knew suddenly feels unfamiliar, and when the ordinary becomes terrifying. These stories linger because they could happen to anyone, because sometimes they really do. Take a moment to think about the stories you've just heard. Maybe you recognized a detail, a creaky staircase, a shadow at the window, a voice in the dark that reminded you of your own life. Maybe you've brushed off a strange experience as a dream, a trick of the mind, or just a coincidence. But what if it wasn't? What if the world is full of cracks and seams, places where the impossible slips through and leaves us with questions we can't answer? For every story that gets posted to our nosleep, there are hundreds more that never make it online. Stories whispered between friends, shared in hushed tones at sleepovers, or kept secret for years out of fear that no one will believe them. The internet has given us a place to share these experiences, to find others who have seen the same shadows, heard the same footsteps, or felt the same chill in the air. It's a reminder that we're not alone, even when the world feels at its darkest. What makes these stories so powerful isn't just the fear. They're about survival, resilience, and the human need to make sense of the unknown. The people who share their stories on our nosleep aren't just looking for a scare. They're searching for answers, for validation, for someone to say, "I believe you." And sometimes, that's all it takes to turn a nightmare into a story of hope. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, you're not alone. Maybe you've seen a face in the mirror that wasn't your own, heard a voice whisper your name when no one was there, or felt the weight of unseen eyes watching you in the night. Maybe you've taken a wrong turn and found yourself somewhere you shouldn't be, or lost time you can't account for. These moments are unsettling, but they're also a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more mysterious than we can ever truly understand. So what should you do if you find yourself living a nosleep story? Trust your instincts. Listen to the little voice that tells you something isn't right. Don't be afraid to ask for help, to reach out to others, or to share your story. You never know who might have experienced the same thing, or who might have the answer you're looking for. And if you're just here for the scares, remember, the best horror stories are the ones that make you question what's real. They're the stories that stay with you long after the lights go out, and make you double-check the locks, and that remind you to look twice before you turn off the light. They're the stories that make you feel alive, even as they send chills down your spine. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the creepiest nosleep stories that actually happened. If you enjoyed these tales, if you have your own story to share, or if you just want to connect with others who see the world a little differently, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story, your theory, or your favorite unexplained moment. And if you want more true horror, Reddit mysteries, and stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. There's always another story waiting, another mystery to explore, another night when sleep just won't come. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and the unknown is a single flickering light.